Ah, the PlayStation. One of the most important video game systems ever released. A game system that not only brought games new and old to a new realm of 3D, but also brought a new challenge to the kings of the video game landscape at the time, Nintendo and Sega. For obvious reasons, it wasn't because the thing could play music CDs, though I will say that's a really cool feature to have in 1995. It was for the huge library of games the system had, and I want to talk about some of those games. But which ones though? There's a lot to choose from when it comes to the PlayStation. I mean, the thing had 3,000 games! I'm gonna die before I even get around to playing Gran Turismo! But even if there are that many games for that system, I doubt I'll even get around to even playing half of them. And half of them probably aren't even worth playing anyway, so which one should I try out for the channel? Maybe Crash Bandicoot? I've played the original trilogy on my PlayStation 3 and the remakes a couple of years ago, and I think those would be fun to visit for a video. Maybe not. Maybe I can cover something I've never really played before, like Spyro the Dragon. I never even touched one of those games, let alone even played them for the channel. Maybe not. Maybe I should cover something a bit more niche. Something that doesn't get talked about a lot when PlayStation is brought up, but something that should be mentioned when PlayStation is brought up. Something or someone who deserves to be in the spotlight with other gaming mascots of the modern era, and is worth being remembered many years into the future. Who could that be? This guy. Confused? Yeah, me too. On with the show! This is Klonoa Door to Phantomile, a 2.5D platformer game that released in 1997 for the PlayStation 1. Now, before I actually went out of my way to play this game, I virtually knew next to nothing about it or the series. But this game, according to fans and critics, is one of the best PlayStation 1 games out there, some even calling it the best the system has to offer. So a few weeks ago, I decided to see what all the fuss was about and play the original PlayStation 1 version on my PlayStation 3. And what do I think personally as someone with no connection to the series whatsoever? Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Now, before we get into the actual gameplay and such of the actual game, I want to talk things like the story, characters, and world first, as I believe something like the gameplay is the most important part when it comes to making a game. So keep that in mind as we go through this review of the PlayStation 1 version. For the story, I could tell that the creators really wanted to do something different here. Heck, it was the whole reason the game exists in the first place, as the game's director, Hiro Yoshizawa, I hope I said your name correctly, stated at the time that not all platforming games were taking advantage of having more complex narratives in their stories, and decided that it'd be the foundation for Klonoa. But as someone who's played the game, and I know the fanbase isn't gonna like me for this, while I do think the story overall was really enjoyable and fun, I can hardly call it anything groundbreaking. Like, it has some really good beats and was able to keep my interest till the end. Something I think any good story should do. But in retrospect, I think the story was a bit too generic for my liking. And that's not me saying that the story is bad or anything, because when the story does try, it really tries. If you know, you know. The story revolves around how Klonoa, our main character, has been having recurring nightmares about something crashing into the mountain outside of his house, with one day Klonoa's dreams finally coming to a reality when the villain, Gaidus, and his henchman Joka plan to drown the world in nightmare. So Klonoa has to travel around the world to find and stop these guys from doing so, and save Phantomile. I was actually really surprised by how some things went about in the story, and at the time I bet a lot of people were very surprised by it too. And I still think that the story overall can be enjoyed greatly, I just don't think it's as great as it possibly could be. But if anything, I can say that the characters definitely elevate the experience to a whole nother level. For our main character, we have Klonoa, a weird cat, human, dog creature thing. And I could say for Klonoa, unlike some mascots of the 1990s, he doesn't feel like he's trying way too hard to be cool or in your face about being some sort of hero. Heck, for a lot of the story, he doesn't even recognize he is the hero. He's simply a kid who was just at the wrong place at the wrong time and got roped into the adventure trying to stop the bad guys. Which, for our villains, I think are pretty good. For our main villain Gaidus, a dark spirit who's trying to change the world to a one full of nightmares, I don't find him very threatening at all. Personally, I think he was the weakest character of the cast. He's just generically evil most of the time when we see him. Nothing more and nothing really less. There's something there about him saying that the world pretty much abandoned him, but I never really got that from his character. Heck, I can say, without a doubt, if anything, Joka, his henchman, was more interesting than him. Obviously, Joker is meant to be one of those henchmen that mess everything up for the main villain and are meant to be the comic relief most of the time, but I think that's why I like him so much, because it shows more personality of his character the more you play. Joker genuinely wants to make sure that Gaius gets what he wants, whether that be throwing his own life on the line to help Gaius get the upper hand, or doing something that caught me so off guard that I don't want to spoil it just in case you decide to play this game, because it genuinely caught me off guard. Again, if you know, you know. If anything, I think Joker could have been a great main villain of his own. Maybe in a side game, but he definitely was not a character that I thought was annoying. If anything, he's by far my favorite character of the lot. Though I wish I could say that rings true for the rest of the cast, because unfortunately, it doesn't really. Joining Klonoa on this adventure is a character named Hubo, the spirit of Klonoa's ring. For a lack of better terms, is essentially just Na'vi from Ocarina of Time. He doesn't serve much in the overall plot. I mean, he does become important at the end of the story, but throughout the adventure, I completely he existed half the time. And the only times I remember him showing up was when he came to give an explanation as to what was going on. I think a way they could have improved this was to give us some sort of time to get to know him better. Maybe some sort of conflict between him and Klonoa, so that way we can get a better view of their friendship dynamic and how they both need each other to accomplish their goals, making me actively care about him and Klonoa's relationship and the outcome in the end of the game. Again, it's not anything that's going to ruin the experience. A lot of this can be just boiled down to nitpicks, but it's just something I wish they would have done better in general. But that's pretty much it for the main cast. All the other characters pretty much serve as secondary characters to the overall plot, giving almost nothing until the final segments of the game. And again, that's not a bad thing. I think that there's a lot of parts where the story could possibly improve from, but overall I thought it was fine. A bit generic, but fine. But if there's one thing I think this game nailed, was its art direction. For a PlayStation 1 game, this game looks really lovely and lively. Clearly they wanted the game to feel alive as they possibly could, and for a game that released in 1997, I can say they hit that mark very well. I love how well made and expressive the sprites are for the main cast and enemies, and I like the atmosphere some of these levels give off, and the soundtrack is so amazing. I think this might be my favorite part of the game overall. Not every track is amazing, but I will say that at the very least, the tracks fit greatly with the game and its setting, and make the game a great time to play through. And speaking of playthrough, it's time to go over the most important part, the actual gameplay of Klonoa. And I should say before we get deep into my thoughts on the gameplay, I will say that the game is fairly easy. If you played any basic 2D platformer, you've played this game before. It's not incredibly easy, the later levels will put your skills to the test, but again, that's just basic 2D platformer 101. Or should I say 2.5D platformer. This is probably the most standout part for Klonoa that a lot of people think of when the game is brought up. The game is a 3D game that plays from a 2D perspective. While the game and platforms are 3D, you're meant to play it and treat it like a 2D side-scroller. And I won't lie, I think the style works really well. And I think what makes it stand out is how it takes advantage of the fact that it's a 2.5D game. Because enemies, points of interest, puzzles, and more just aren't in front or behind you. They're also in the foreground and the background. And they subtly sprinkle these mechanics at the beginning of the game so the player can understand that you're gonna need to think outside the box for some of these puzzles or to get around another part of the level. And almost everything that revolves around this gimmick is highly important. Heck, even enemies are now important. Unlike most games that have you simply jump on creatures' heads to get rid of them, Klonoa takes a different approach and uses the enemies to expand the level design. With Klonoa's ring, he can inflate his enemies. Jokes aside, this is primarily the gameplay structure that you'll be doing for the whole game, which I think is a very intuitive way to have the enemies actually play a bigger role in the game overall, rather than it be just, oh, he hurt me, he must die. And they do put your skills to the test when using these enemies in the latter half of the game. Though, if there's one thing I could say about this particular version of Klonoa that has a problem regarding gameplay, it's its presentation. And no, I'm not saying that the game has aged like milk or something. This is still a very competent platformer, probably regardless of the platform that you're playing it on. But I will say that the presentation, however, does date the experience a little bit. Because if you couldn't tell, while the levels and some of its creatures are 3D models and characters, for the gameplay they take the Donkey Kong approach to animating Klonoa enemies and points of interest. That being that they're animated as 3D models first, then changed and compressed to become 2D sprites. Which isn't a bad idea, after all several games did this trick to save memory space and create the illusion of 3D graphics. But this sometimes can cause an overall issue with the gameplay. Now, this isn't an issue to everyone, and overall Klonoa is still a very fair game with its difficulty balancing. But for me, I found it difficult to know where I was landing or where my hitbox was, or the enemy's hitbox for that matter. And this isn't a problem exclusively to Klonoa either. I have the same problem with Donkey Kong and any other games of this nature. This is probably something that wouldn't be an issue in the remastered version that released years after the PlayStation 1 version, but for this specific version of the game, it is somewhat of an issue regarding gameplay. But other than that, the game is pretty solid. You jump, collect items, you get to the end of the stage to continue on to the end of the game. Pretty much the only issues I have with the game overall is that the story could have been a bit better, and that the presentation can make the gameplay kinda annoying. But other than that, I can say that this was a lot of fun to visit for the first time. And I can definitely see why this game has the cult status that it does. When the game came out in 1997, while it sold well in Japan, America and Europe weren't into it. But I think that's more because of the audience that the system of the game was releasing on at the time. For a lot of people who are probably playing on the system, were probably getting tired of these kinds of games. Maybe if it released on a different system, maybe it would have been a different story, but by far I can say this was a really fun game to visit, and I can definitely recommend this game to anyone, even the PlayStation 1 version. And again, just keep in mind those problems I mentioned earlier in the video. And if you're at all interested in playing the remastered versions, I'll leave links to all the platforms that those are available on. And if you even enjoyed that, there's even a sequel in that collection. Which, much like this game in particular, I have no idea what this one has to offer. So if you want, let me know in the comments if you want me to check out the sequel, or even the collection for that matter if it improves anything about the PlayStation 1 version, and I might update this video. All I'll say at the end of it is go play Klonoa. Please. It's very fun. Also, what is up with this? This is gonna scar me.